Welcome to 12.5. Today we're going to be talking about the law of cosines. The only vocab term is law of cosines, and that's the way to solve triangles when you're given side angle side or side side side. So the formula for law of cosines is given here. It's just three different versions of the same formula. Okay, and how we use that is our angle and then the side on each side of it. Okay, that's what we're going to use if we're given side, angle, side. Okay, the other thing we can have with it and use this is if we have all three sides. And then we can start solving for angles as well. Okay, so it's either two sides with the angle in between or all three sides. And again, here's our formula. Okay, we can have side A squared is equal to side B squared plus side C squared minus 2 times side B times side C times the cosine of angle A. And again, these are interchangeable. The only thing to remember is that the side that's on its own is across from the angle that's used in the equation. Okay, and then the other sides are used in these spots. So again, B squared cosine of B, C squared cosine of C. So just remember the side that's on a side by itself is going to be the same as the angle used in the problem. So the first one we're going to be doing is we're going to be given side angle side, and we're going to ask to solve the triangle. So again, we're going to have to find the three missing pieces. So in this particular case, we are given side C, side A, and then angle B. When we are given this, the first thing that we find is the opposite side length. Okay, that's going to be the first thing we find, and we're going to write out the equation. B squared is equal to A squared plus C squared minus 2 times A times C times the cosine of B. Now what I can do is I can actually type this right side into my calculator as I see it. I can type all of that in, and when I do, I get an answer of about 17.4. And then I'm going to do the square root of both sides to get my value for B, and if I do the square root of 17.4, I get an answer of about 4.2. Okay, so again, side lengths we're going to be rounding to 2 decimal places, so I can fill that in here. So now for the other parts, to find angles, it's a little bit different. Okay, I'm going to need this room here because it is a little bit more writing to find an angle measure using the law of cosines. What we can do to find angle A, okay, we're going to use side A. So we're going to have 7 squared is equal to B squared plus C squared minus 2 times A times C times the cosine of A. So what I need to do first is I need to do all of these individually. So 7 squared is 49. 4.2 squared is 17.64. 5 squared is 25. 2 times 4.2 times 5 gets me a 42. I can add these two numbers together, and that's going to get me 42.64. Subtract the 42.64 over to the other side. That's going to get me 6.36 is equal to a negative 42 cosine of A. Divide both sides by a negative 42, and I'm going to get that it's about negative 0.15 is equal to the cosine of A. To get rid of cosine, remember we use inverse, so we're going to do inverse cosine of both sides. And so angle A is going to be rounded to the nearest angle, 99 degrees. Now we can do it that way, or if you feel more comfortable, since we have an angle and its opposite side length, you can go back to the law of sines to do it, so feel free to do that as well. And finally, for angle C, I already know 2 of the angles of the triangle, so I can add those 2 angles up and subtract it from 180. So I'm going to take 180 minus 135, and that's going to get me a 45 degree angle for angle C. Okay, once again, you're not always going to be given the picture, so you could just be given that angle B is 82 and side A is 6, side C is 4. Again, you'll notice that it's side angle side because all the letters are different. Okay, 2 side lengths and then the angle in between, all the letters should be different. So again, the first thing we're going to find is the opposite side length of our angle, so we're going to find B first. So B squared is equal to A squared plus C squared minus 2 times A times C times the cosine of angle B. And again, I can type that into my calculator and get about 45.3. And if I take the square root of 45.3, I get that B is about 6.7. Okay, so now I'm going to show you that we can do it with law of sines as well. So if I switch now to the law of sines, I can do B over the sine of angle B is equal to, let's say, A over the sine of A. And I can go ahead and cross multiply and solve. So 6 sine of 82 is equal to 6.7 sine of A. Divide both sides by 6.7. And I get that the sine of A is equal to about 0.89. Then I can do the inverse sine of both sides. And that's going to get me an angle measure of, to the nearest degree, 63 degrees. And then again, to find angle C, I add up the two that I do have, and then I subtract it from 180. So I'm going to take 180 minus 145. That's going to get me an angle measure of 35 degrees. So a little bit easier to use the law of sines for that. So if you choose to do that, that's fine. Otherwise, you can use the law of cosines that we did before. Go ahead and pause the video, solve this triangle on your own, and then hit play and see how you did. Regardless of which way you did it, you should have gotten that side B is 5.1, angle A is 36 degrees, and angle C is 52 degrees. Now we're going to take a look at when we're given all three sides. So when we're given this, we have to use the law of cosines to find an angle. We don't have a way around it like we did on side angle side. So if I want to find one angle first, let's find angle A since it's the first one listed here. Again, I use the side across from it. So we got 16 squared is equal to 9 squared plus 10 squared minus 2 times 9 times 10 times the cosine of A. And again, I'm going to solve all of these first. So 16 squared is 256, 9 squared is 81, 10 squared is 100, 2 times 9 times 10 is 180. I can add on the right side there and get 181. I subtract 181 over to the other side, and I get that 75 is equal to a negative 180 cosine of A. Always remember to keep that negative. It's very important. Divide both sides by negative 180. I get a negative 0.42 is equal to the cosine of A. Inverse cosine of both sides. And I get to the nearest degree that A is 115 degrees. Once I have that, again, I can switch over to the law of sines. So I'm going to get rid of this work here so I have a little more room to work with. So if I'm going to go for angle B next, I do 16 over the sine of 115 is equal to side B, which is 9, over the sine of B. And I can go into cross multiplying. 16 sine of B is equal to 9 times the sine of 115. Divide both sides by 16, and I get that the sine of B is equal to about 0.51. Do the inverse sine of both sides, and that's going to get me a B value to the nearest degree of 31 degrees. Then to find C, I add up the other two angles and subtract it from 180, so I'm going to take 180 minus 146. That's going to get me a C angle of 34 degrees. So A is 115, B is 31, and C is 34. Again, law of sines is an option. After the first one, you can always go back to law of cosines and get all of them. Law of sines just takes a little less room and a little quicker to work with. Again, not always going to be given a picture of the triangle. You could just be given the three side lengths. A is 5, B is 11, C is 8. When you're given this, when you're finding a certain angle like A, remember side A goes by itself, and then B and C are over with angle A. So my equation should look something like this. 5 squared is equal to 11 squared plus 8 squared minus 2 times 2 times 11 times 8 times the cosine of A. 5 squared is 25, 11 squared is 121, 8 squared is 64. 2 times 11 times 8 should be 176. I can add 121 and 64 together, giving me 185. Subtracting the 185 over to the other side, I should get a negative 160. Dividing the negative 176 over to the other side, I should get about 0.91 is equal to the cosine of A. Inverse cosine of both sides, I should get to the nearest degree that A is 24 degrees. Once again, once I have that, I can switch over to law of sines if I want to. I can do 5 over the sine of 24 is equal to 11 over the sine of B. Cross multiply, 5 times the sine of B is equal to 11 times the sine of 24. Divide both sides by 5. I get that the sine of B is equal to about 0.89. Inverse sine of both sides, I get to the nearest degree that B is about 63 degrees. Finally, for C, I can add the two angles up that I have and subtract it from 180. So I'm going to have 180 minus 87, giving me an angle measure for C of 93 degrees. So again, always an option to stay with law of cosines, but again, it saves room, saves time to switch over to law of sines after you've found the first one. Go ahead and pause the video, solve this one on your own, and then hit play and see how you did. Regardless of which way you solved it, you should have gotten that A is 112 degrees, B is 41 degrees, and C is 27 degrees. So make sure you check your work before moving on. Just to review, law of sines versus law of cosines, depending on what you're given, each one has its benefits of being done first. If you're given two angles and any of the sides, you probably want to start with law of sines. If you're given two sides and an angle of opposite of one of them, you want to use law of sines. If you're given two sides and the angle in between the two sides, you want to use law of cosines. And if you're given all three sides, you want to use law of cosines as well. So again, depending on what you're given in the triangle, will tell you which law you're going to start the problem with.